Hello everyone, Jim Babel, the Superintendent of the Platteville School District. Thank you for being interested in our school. We're appreciative of that. What we have in front of us are several slides, and we have two goals. One of the goals is to make sure that everybody who can vote goes and votes on April the 2nd. The second goal is that when you vote, you have an informed vote. So hopefully in the next 15 to 20 minutes, I share some valuable information that allows you to go vote and then make that informed vote. So let's get started. We have our operating referendum, April 2nd. When a school district annually, they have a budget, and that budget is approved at our annual meeting, and that is in late October for the Platteville School District. So what I want to do is begin by saying and kind of describing how a school district builds their budget. So the first thing is we need to have our budget be aligned with what we hold valuable. There's a strong mantra in schools, and you are what you honor. So when you build your budget, you must honor what you do. And we have our mission statement that we look through that lens when we make all of our primary decisions. We are a people-first business with our staff and our students. And as budgets change, usually the change is so we can continue to adjust and better serve our students and our families as our demographics change. When we build our budget, we want to have that high level of instruction, but also note, in our budget, 80% or more is dedicated to our staff. And so when we start to look at an annual budget, that staffing piece is critical. And the last bullet point there, we are unable to cut our way to excellence. When you build a budget, you have to have in mind what's our duty. Our responsibility is to provide the best education we can for every student every day. So with that in mind, we start to plan each annual budget, and we're already in the process of planning next year's budget. In the school world, our budget starts on July 1 and ends on June 30, so we need to start preparing for that now. As we looked into and started preparing for next year's budget, here are 3 items that make it a challenge to get in alignment with our changing student needs. And the first one is inflation. And right now, our state funding formula determines how much revenue that a school district can receive each year. That formula is not able to adjust with inflation. It's not able to keep up with the inflationary costs as they go up. And we'll talk about that in a couple of slides. So we have inflationary expenses. Prices are going up more than we are allowed for revenue. The biennial budget was passed, and in 24-25, we have a 2.4% increase in our budget for that school year, but yet inflation is increasing more than 2.4%. So we start to see our issue. And then finally, everything else is going up in prices, not just the cost of living, but we have service supplies, insurance, healthcare costs. As with everybody else, we have those burdens that we need to be responsible for as a school district. When you're in a situation in which your budget alignment, how you serve students, is not able to meet the needs of the students based on the school funding formula, you then have the ability as a school district to ask your property owners that are within your district. You can ask for 2 types of referendum, 2 types of monies that you can collect. And you have a referendum. The school board, 9 elected members of our community, they agree to say we want to have a referendum question. And then that question goes out and the community votes on it. One example is a capital referendum. A capital referendum, a school district, in order to stay current, usually considers one of those every 5 to 7 years. We recently had a capital referendum in November of 2022. So that is an example of the state funding formula for education did not provide enough for those facility improvements. So about every 5 to 7 years, district evaluates, takes it to the vote, and in our situation, the community supported that capital improvement. This is a different situation we're in. This is more of those day-to-day expenses. And as I said earlier, with an operating referendum, one of the targets we try and capture would be the salary and benefits of our staff, the most important piece of our school system. With an operating referendum, again, reverting back to the state of Wisconsin has revenue limits. They will only allow a district to receive so much money based on the formula they have. If a district wants to capture more money, they have to go to a referendum. An operational referendum can be two varieties, a recurring and a non-recurring. To begin with the non-recurring, it's really in the title. That is a referendum in which you set parameters. In our situation, our Board of Education has approved the question to have a 5-year non-recurring referendum. And it is staggered out all of those 5 years to try and keep the district at a level situation when it comes to our deficit. This is what a lot of districts do. And one of the benefits of having a non-recurring referendum, ours is 5-year, if supported and passed, our community in 5 years gets to review this. And it's a nice check and balance when you are doing your best to be a good steward of public funds and you're responsible to the community that you serve. So that's a non-recurring, and that is what the Platteville School District chose to do for a question. You can also have a recurring. A recurring, once that is proposed and supported, then that dollar amount just goes into every budget. In Platteville, in the year 2006, we had passed a recurring referendum that increased our budget by 1.5 million. So that is in there, and when you do recurring, excuse me, when you do recurring, you only vote once and it's there forever. So as we debated what we would like to do in our current situation, we felt it was the best to do non-recurring because in 5 years, maybe some things change. Maybe this inflation and the economy makes some sort of turn in which we need to review it and then we can adjust. So we've talked about the budget. We've talked about how we build the budget, the needs of our students to stay current. We've also talked about how a district can ask their community for more funds so they can continue to serve their students. So this slide is really getting to the heart of why we find ourselves in this situation today. So back in 2009, 2010, when the state determined what the revenue limit would be for a school, and kind of on a side note here, each school has a different revenue limit. Each school is funded at different amounts. That goes all the way back to 1993. I think that's a conversation for a different time though. But in Platteville, 2009, 2010, the state at that point in time, prior to that, the state would have the revenue formula linked with, coupled with, what the CPI was. And that's the Consumer Price Index. They decoupled the school revenue limits from CPI. And this bottom line, the blue line, talks about where it actually is since then, since it hasn't stayed with CPI. The gray line is where we would be if it were still coupled, still linked to where the revenue formula would say, what's the CPI? Plug that into the equation, and then each school will get their amount. So this gap is $3,380 per pupil. And it goes all the way back to 2009, 2010. And for a while, that really wasn't noticeable for the Platteville School District. Go back to the year 2006 when we passed that recurring referendum. That allowed us to stay and not have such a drastic drop-off. But now that we get to the high inflation years, this amount grows and it grows quickly. So in this situation, we're trying to build a budget. We see that the near future does not provide relief as far as being able to serve our students as the best that we can. So let's try and put a forecast model to use. The district, along with many other districts, they use a forecast model, and that's what this represents. Baird is our financial partner. They help they help the schools make these determinations, help us manage our funds. And so this model, you plug in all the numbers you can. This one is, what will our budget look like without an operational referendum? So a line to pay attention to is the surplus deficit. So in the current year, we have a $1.4 million deficit spend. So then we go to next year, if everything stays according, we'll have an additional 1.2 million, an additional 1.2 million, 25, 26, and then in 26, 27, an additional 1.4 million. So that's that surplus. Something to make note of, with these forecast models, the immediate year that we're talking about, the nearest year, these are very accurate. Once you get a year out, that accuracy tends to decrease because there are unknown items that could pop up. And then the further you get out, it becomes less and less reliable. So we can look at this and have confidence in the 24-25 numbers, and then we start to look, well, how is it trending long term? A fund balance, that's this next line. More so than the dollars, let's look at the percentage of a fund balance. In school accounting, on July 1st of each year, we are audited by an independent auditor. And what they do, one of the things that they complete is they have this fund balance. And it's basically at that day, assets versus liabilities. And that's your fund balance. It changes throughout the school year. And one of the reasons it changes is our expenses, so we have payroll twice a month. That's guaranteed. That's coming twice a month. The state puts money into schools' accounts, moves money at 4 irregular times of the year and at 4 different amounts. So this fund balance is a good indicator that you can continue to function throughout the year. And that is why in our school policy, it is a rule that our fund balance may not go below 15%. And that gives us the ability to go through the highs and lows of when the state is taking money and placing it into our school. So with that in mind, we started last school year, we had a 26.53% fund balance. And that was a good amount. We had made decisions that allowed us to have that comfortable amount of a fund balance. With this year's budget, it took a hit down to 19% of a fund balance. And then if nothing happens, remember this is without, if nothing happens, next year it'll be below that 12.94%. And that's where a school district, I think there's risk inherent there. And we want to avoid that risk. And as we go forward, you can see how it trends to the negative. This bottom graph is kind of on the same line, looking in the same direction. So what might it look like with an operating referendum? So we were able to use that same forecasting model and use some different numbers. And our goal as we built the amounts for the 5-year non-recurring referendum was to try and get the surplus deficit line, try and get it close to 0. And if we walk through, we have the budget year 24-25. The first year of that non-recurring referendum is 1.5 million additional funds. That allows us to have $426 as far as a deficit out of a somewhere around $22 million budget. So it's keeping us level. And that's a key point that I need to stress. When we went through this process of building our budget, of looking at an operating referendum, we just want to maintain the services that we currently have. This is not an instance where we're trying to get extra funds and save them for a rainy day. Not at all. This operating referendum is just to maintain our current level of services. So as we go through 2 years out, 1.8 million, $62,000 in surplus, and then it gets back into the red, but not too bad. Keep in mind what we had talked about earlier, in which this first year it's pretty accurate, the second year still pretty accurate, but not so much. And then the rest of it, you're kind of looking for where that's trending. Another question that this helps us look at is, what about the mill rate? The year before I started, or a couple years before I started, and so let's try and go 15, 16, around there. Our mill rate was about 10, and that's a good mill rate. That allows all of the different players in that property tax in order so they can function as well. So in 22-23, last year, our mill rate was 7.62, and that's been a steady decline from 10 down to 7.62 with the mill rate. This year it went down 3 cents to 7.59. With this non-recurring operating referendum, it would increase the mill rate 54 cents up to $8.13. So we're still lower than we were 5-6 years ago. And then this is how it tracks in 8, 8.2, 8.2, 8.2. So when we were using different dollar amounts, we concentrated on how much of a surplus would we be getting, and then also what's it going to do to our mill rate. And if we can keep this mill rate in the 7 to 8 range, and families can depend on keeping it in that 7 to 8 range, that allows us to budget, it allows families to budget as well. As I talked about earlier, the tax impact, and as a property owner, this is where we need to be interested. So the total non-recurring amount, that's 10.5 million, that's over 5 years. And if we can look back and see how it stepped up, the reason why it steps up is because that inflation model, things are going up, the cost of things are going up, and our state revenue formula has no signs of being changed. So if you have a $200,000 home, that's 54 cents per $1,000 evaluation equals $108. So the number that a lot of property owners can identify with is this chart right here. This is what will occur if the question is supported by our community. This is just an example of City of Platteville property taxes. When I was saying the different players, that how the school likes to keep their mill rate 10 or below. In Platteville's case, we're shooting for 7 to 8. So the school district of that property bill, 38.35%, this is from last year. The city has their share, Grant County has their share, and then Southwest Wisconsin Technical College has their share. Now to kind of bring it all together, you've heard me mention a couple of times about the state funding formula and how it's not able to meet the needs of the students. It doesn't react quickly enough for the changing needs that our students need for success. A key date while we study this picture is July 5th of 2023. So last summer. On that date, the state of Wisconsin released their biennial budget. And it was done. And in that budget, we travel back in time here, let's go forward. Oh, no, there it is. This current school year that we're in, the state revenue formula increased our revenues by about $530,000. The same for next year. And that's why when I go back to that July 5th, 2023, that is when we found this information out. We had went into this school year with a nice fund balance. But when that budget was released, and it did not compensate for inflation. It doesn't have that mechanism in it anymore. And that's what this slide is trying to show. So we have to where the state funding formula is not keeping up with the different costs that we have. So as a result, school districts go to their property owners and ask, will you support these referendums? With that in mind, we have 31 schools in our local CISA 3 region, Southwest Wisconsin, if you will. 11 of those schools have questions on April 2nd. Within the past 5 years, all but 4 of these schools have asked a referendum question. I cannot go into the future, but I suspect in November, we're going to have more schools because the funding formula just isn't keeping up with sustaining what we offer for our student needs. And so Southwest Wisconsin problem? No, it's a state problem. Because on that April 2nd ballot this season, we have 1 out of every 4 school districts doing the same thing that we're doing. So to me, this highlights that there is a concern, there's an issue with that state funding formula. And here we have the ballot language for that. When you do go vote, and you make it an informed vote, this is the language that will be there. And remember, it's 5 years, and it's stepped out that amount for the school year, that amount for the school year, and it keeps going for those 5 years. And then it's finished. And there's an opportunity then for the district to review, use the school board, use community conversations, and say, well, what's our current situation so we can adjust that way. To kind of wrap it all up, please go vote. Please go vote, and make sure you have an informed vote. And then the school district will take those results and do what we need to do. This is a QR code. You can scan that. We have part of our district's webpage. We have a portion dedicated just on information for the operating referendum. This other QR code, that is a short video that kind of explains it in a different way as far as how the revenue funding formula just isn't linked to inflation and it wasn't able to adjust. So thank you for listening to this presentation. Please go vote. Please make an informed vote. And if you know somebody who isn't going to vote, talk to them, encourage them to become informed, and then go vote with them. So please do that. What we're going to do now is do a quick set change. And if there are questions that have been generated, I'll start to talk to them. So please hang on for, I think, maybe a minute. Thank you. Once again, thank you for dedicating the time to learning more about your school district. We don't have any questions at this time. We will be distributing this video out, and if you have questions, please go to the webpage. Poke around there, find some information, ask somebody at the school, email me, talk to me, and I'll try and do my best to explain what this operating referendum is about. Thank you so much and have a great day.